This is Straight Up Mortgage with Madi, and today we are going to talk about the topic as to whether or not our pipelines are too much, too little. What is the average pipeline, right? What is considered too much? What is considered too little? This is a question I get a lot, both directly. I've seen it in some of the processing groups on Facebook. Um, and I kind of just wanted to shine light to that question. Now, when we're going to talk about the average pipeline, we have to think about some components, right? Every company, the way that it's set up is going to be a little bit different from company to company. Some companies a little bit different, some companies a bit drastically different. So it really just depends upon your workload. You know, traditionally the duties of a processor, they are many, right? A laundry list of duties. And depending upon the company that you work at, you may have more duties, you may have less. For companies in which you have less duties, then obviously you can handle more loans. I feel that the standard should be between 40 and maybe 50. It can get up to 60 if that company really has their process streamlined. But with like this example I'm about to give you for company A, I would say your pipeline should be 20 loans, maximum, because the more things you have to do on a loan, the longer it's going to take, then you don't have enough capacity in order to do all of these steps for every single loan without, dropping the ball or error or things of that nature. So in this case, we have company A, and company A has origination, they have a processing department, they have the underwriting department, they have the closing department, right? Now, at company A, the only job the originator has to do is market and get the deal. Once they get that deal, they slap it together somehow and it goes to the processor. Now, when that file gets to the processor now has to complete the application, right? Making sure that we have the 2 years residence history, that we have the 2 years employment history. They're calculating the income. They're reaching out to the borrower in the event that we have missing documentation. Sometimes the file isn't set up properly by the LO, so now the processor is now setting up this file. Maybe the loan originator set up the file for a specific program. As the processor is going through the file, they realize that this borrower doesn't even qualify for the program. So now they're restructuring this loan and, basically doing the job of what I feel an LOA or the LO should do. So if you're working at company A and you find yourself, completing the application, you find yourself setting up the file, and with setting up the file, that could be again going through the documents, labeling them correctly, putting them in the right buckets, but also restructuring the file, completing the application. You know, those are tedious things in itself. And then company A also has the processor ordering the disclosures. And with ordering disclosures also comes doing the change of circumstance. So if there needs to be a redisclosure, the processor is doing that as well. And then on top of all of that, they're ordering the services and verifications, but that takes up time. Even if it can be simple to order services and verifications, it's still time that needs to be accounted for. And when you're ordering services and when you're ordering verifications, you also have to think some of these things aren't just automatic. Maybe you order it and the person doesn't get back to you. You have to follow up on it. This is time, this is energy, this is, these are a lot of tasks for a processor. And then they have to chase the conditions. And now, when processors are chasing conditions, I've heard terms like, paper chasing and things of that nature. We're not just paper chasing, right? Because you want your processor to be a professional. And as a professional, we know what we're looking for, we know what we're going after. And some of these conditions, it's not just like an updated pay stub, it's not just, you know, a letter of explanation. Everything is owned free and clear. And you're expecting your processor to understand what all of these conditions are and how to execute obtaining them. And this all requires skill, right? So if we need to, this address showed up on a fraud report. Some processors are like, what? But you know, more experienced processors will understand, like, we need to, something shows up on a fraud report, like an address or something. We need to know that it's owned free and clear. It takes a knowledge of the processor to say, oh, okay, I can go to the county records and look up to see who owns this. Maybe our borrower doesn't even own this property. Let me go look it up. That takes time. Research takes time. Calling the title company to do research, that takes time. Following up with a title company to do research, that all takes time. You know, conditions, it's not just chasing paper. It's not just, you know, the simplicity of ordering something really quick and it just comes back, slapping it together and submitting it to underwriting. We have to take our time. We have to make sure everything makes sense, because ultimately what these loans get sold to an investor, and we can't just slap a file together and give it to the investor, right? It has to be clear. It has to be concise. The investor needs to understand the story that we are telling in order for them to buy this loan that we're selling. Company A's underwriter is underwriting the file, you know, reviewing and decisioning the loan. They're also going to clear conditions when that loan gets back. I know, you know, some underwriters do a little bit more, and this is a lot. Underwriting a loan is a lot. So I'm not taking that from the underwriter, especially if you have complex files. Same thing with processing though. If you have a simple file, a regular 40-hour a week, and just everything is cut and cookie cutter clean, of course that file is easier. But everybody's life is different. You know, every file that you come across is going to look different, because we as individuals, we don't live cookie cutter lives. So if we have more complex files, the processor's already doing all of this, and then the file's more complex. We have a 2 borrower file, 3 borrower file, 4 borrower file. You know, maybe the borrower owns rental property. Maybe the borrower is self-employed. This is all more time, right? More time consuming and more energy that's being taken from the processor. So this is a lot of things. And of course, your closing department, they're preparing that closing disclosure. They're also preparing the closing documents. You have some processors that they're also preparing the closing disclosure. So, you know, if you're working at a company that's like Company A, where everything is on the back of the processor, then your pipeline should be like 20 loans, because you're doing a lot of work. You're doing a lot of work. So if you're a processor out there and you're interviewing, you want to find out the workflow of that company and how they do things. When I was still processing and I would interview with companies, let's say if I interviewed with 2 companies, really how I weighed which way I went is the process of how they do things. Because if I have to properly set up a file, complete the application, you know, make the file work, that's not the job of a processor, in my opinion. That's the job of the LO. The LO is supposed to be doing those tasks. Because if I have to do that and everything else, then it's like, you know, come on. So you have Company B. They have origination, processing, underwriting, closing. They also have a disclosure desk. Then you have some places where they don't, not only do they have a disclosure desk, they have an opening desk. They have a junior processor, right? Because they acknowledge that these tasks take up time and energy. So we have the originator in this example. They're completing the application. They aren't just, grabbing a deal, slapping it in the system, making the numbers work. the way that they can, not running DU and submitting it to processing. They are completing the application, they're running AUS to make sure that their deal is actually a go. Um, if it goes to processing, if something happens, it needs to be restructured, we're pushing that file back to the LO. He's going to restructure his deal. He's setting up that file. He's collecting the minimum documents needed to get that file decisioned upon, or she. This LO is doing more than just closing the deal. Not to say that call and getting that deal is not important. It is important, but we need to make sure it's a real deal, right? So how do we know that if we don't have a complete application? How do we know that if we didn't set up the file? How do we know that if we don't run AUS? And then now the file gets pushed straight to processing, and then, it's a can of worms, and then a processor gets blamed for everything, and origination scot-free because they're sales, right? Company B also has a disclosure desk. So I know some companies have origination ordering disclosures, which I think is great also, but I really applaud the companies that have disclosure desks, because disclosures are so important and they're very expensive. And when I say expensive, they're expensive to the company. If a company does not want to eat a bunch of fees and they want to be compliant, it will behoove them to have a disclosure desk who's ordering the disclosures, who's doing the re-disclosures as well, the COCs. And in this example, this company B has a disclosure desk, and they're taking care of all of that information. So now processing is pre-underwriting the file. And when I say pre-underwrite, we're basically supposed to be looking into some of the things that underwriting is going to look into. So that way we can kind of have a clean file with minimal conditions instead of 20 conditions back from underwriting. So we're checking the guidelines. We're paying attention to our DTI and LTV. We're looking at the program that we're processing, right? We're looking at the documents that are in the file, and we're cross-checking against our AUS findings, because that's what underwriting is going to do, right? Underwriting is going to read their findings, go over any company overlays, any investor overlays, when they are creating their conditional loan approval list. But that's what we want processors to do as well, to pre-screen. So again, this is going to take time. We're not just slapping things together and pushing it off. So if this takes time, then we would need more space. Company B also has the processor chasing conditions, and they're ordering their verifications. Some companies even have junior processors or setup desks that are ordering verifications and ordering services. Underwriting a loan, decisioning a loan, clearing conditions. Closing's preparing the closing disclosure, prepare closing documents. So as you can see, the difference between company A and company B is really here with these first three bubbles. Processing, if you are finding that you have a bunch of tasks, if you're like, oh no, Madi, I do all of this. So if you do everything here, I would say you should have 20 loans in your pipeline. And some companies I've seen that they have less when they have to do all of that. But if your company is automated and streamlined, and they're actually taking it into account as far as having people to help streamline the process, including the originator actually doing some work on their file, then I would say definitely between 40, 50. If it's very busy and you're a very good seasoned, experienced processor, 60, Something else that I'm even going to throw in there, there's companies that have upfront underwriting. Some companies call it fast track. And that's when the loan goes from origination right into underwriting. A lot of companies are doing this. A lot of companies are not. That takes a bulk of the stress off of the processor. And it's the processor that's going to be pulling in, all of this information. We are the middleman. So we want for the processor to be, we don't want them to be stressed, or we are going to be stressed, right? So we want to remove as much stress as we can from the processor. So I hope this was able to kind of give you a visual understanding as to what some companies do, what other companies do, and you can kind of see where you fit in and kind of hear my guesstimation as to how I feel or what I think the typical pipeline should be. The process is not a perfect process. We are every day really looking for better ways to do this, because I'm not the only one that sees this process as one that is not perfect. It's one that is full of imperfections. But the companies that don't go around blaming, it's the processor, everybody's pointing at the processor, but finding ways to kind of help the processor to usher their file along, um, is are the companies that I really commend and that I really respect. Ones that are willing to put the money into disclosure desks and different ways to streamline the process, because this is how the process has been for eternity, right? But it doesn't mean that it can't change. It doesn't mean that it cannot improve. It doesn't mean that it's been right. And we need more things than we used to need, right? It's like every year there's something new that they want a processor to do. Run this report, add this other fraud report, do this Maven, do this loan safe, do this fraud guard. It's like so many aspects. We're ordering this and ordering that and re-verifying this. It is a lot. Um, but I do actually have an idea as to how to streamline all of this, which I am working on. And I'm pretty excited to share this with my channel at some point in the near future. But thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.